Coming up on UGTV, Board of Commission meeting of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
I'd like to now call the meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Roll call: Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia.
Here.
Johnson. Kane. Markley.
Here.
Walters. Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Alvey.
Here. All right, this evening our invocation is being given by Reverend Brian Mann of Bethel Seventh-day Adventist Church. Please stand and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's bow our heads. Lord, we thank you again that you have called us as servants to do the work of ministering to your people. We ask that you would lead us and guide us, allow your spirit to be in our presence. We ask that all things would be done decently and in order, and we ask that you would bless the things that we attempt to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Reverend Mann. Clerk, are there any revisions to tonight's agenda?
There are no revisions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So tonight we have two distinct parts to our meeting. The planning and zoning portion will be handled first, followed by the regular commission meeting. I'll ask the clerk to read the statement required by state law governing the planning and zoning portion of our meeting, followed by the items on the planning and zoning consent agenda.
We would like to welcome all present to this meeting of the Unified Government Commission. Members of the commission are Mayor David Alvey, Commissioner Melissa Bynum, at-large District 1, Commissioner Tom Burrows, at-large District 2, Commissioner Gail Townsend, District 1, Commissioner Brian McKiernan, District 2, Commissioner Ann Mugia, District 3, Commissioner Harold Johnson Jr., District 4, Commissioner Mike Kane, District 5, is unable to be here, Commissioner Angela Markley, District 6, Commissioner Jim Walters, District 7, and Commissioner Jane Philbrook, District 8. As each petition is called this evening, all persons for or against will be given the opportunity to express their views. If this is the first time that a particular petition has been before this commission, the commission has three options. Number one, it can approve the recommendation of the Planning Commission with 6 votes. Number two, it can override the Planning Commission's recommendation, but it would take 8 votes to override. And number 3, it can return the matter to the Planning Commission for further consideration, together with a statement specifying the reasons for the referral back to the Planning Commission. The consent agenda is the first part of the Planning and Zoning agenda. Items on the consent agenda have received a unanimous vote of recommendation by the Planning Commission. Unless there is a request to set aside an item from the consent agenda by the applicant, a member of the public, the Unified Government Commission, or staff, then the Planning Commission's recommendation on all items on the consent agenda will be adopted by the Unified Government Commission at one time. I will read the list of agenda items on the consent agenda, and when I have completed the list, the mayor will ask if there are any requests to set aside items from the consent agenda. This is your time to stand up and request that an item be set aside if you do not agree with the Planning Commission's recommendation. If an item is set aside, the matter would be discussed and voted upon separately. All items not set aside will be approved with the Planning Commission's recommendation. We appreciate the attendance of those people here this evening and recognize the importance of each petition. We would remind you that there are a number of items on the agenda, and we would appreciate your efforts to make your remarks as concise as possible. We ask that anyone with a cell phone to please turn them off or switch to non-audio so you will not disturb the meeting. Once the petitioners make their presentation, anyone for or against will be allowed the maximum 3 minutes to state your views. As you come to the microphone, please state your name and city for the record. The mayor and commission are required to disclose contacts with proponents or opponents on any item on the planning and zoning agenda. I will ask if any member of the commission wish to disclose any contact with proponents or opponents on any items on the agenda.
Commissioner McKiernan?
I've had contact with opponents of SP 2019-106.
Thank you. I also have been contacted by opponents of 2019-106. Any others? Seeing none?
I will now read the items on the consent agenda. Change of own applications, item number 13207, Eric Shield with KC Property Guys LLC. Change of zone from R1 Single Family District to R2 Family District for an existing duplex at 1815 North 78th Street, recommended for approval. Item 2, 3208 Scott Confer with Phelps Engineering, change of zone from AG Agricultural and R1A Residential Districts to AG Agricultural District to divide the lot and build an additional house at 12525 Leavenworth Road, recommended for approval. Item 3, 3209 Matt Schlitt with Engineering Solutions, change of zone from RP1 Planned Single Family District to R1 Single Family District to revise the previously approved plan in order to better identify and modify the site amenities for West Ridge Estates at 4401 North 115th Street, recommended for approval. Special use permit applications, item 1, SP 2019-62, Michael Johnson with 7th Street Event Center is a renewal of a special use permit for an event hall in conjunction with specialty dress shop and office space storage at 733 through 735 Minnesota Avenue, recommended for approval for 5 years. Item 2, SP 2019-99, Wendy and Larry Foland, special use permit for a short-term rental Airbnb at 528 Ann Avenue, recommended for approval for 1 year. Item 3, SP 2019-105, Megan Duma, special use permit for a short-term rental Airbnb at 2706 Espelon Lane, recommended for approval for 1 year. Item 4, SP 2019-106, Megan M. Duma, special use permit for a short-term rental Airbnb at 408 Sandusky Avenue, recommended for approval for 1 year. Item 5, SP 2019-109, Efren Carrera, special use permit to keep horses on the property at 5124 Sloan Avenue, recommended for approval for 2 years. Vacation application 1 item, UE 2019-6, Melissa Van Crum, vacation of a utility use easements at 2600 by State Drive, recommended for approval. Miscellaneous ordinances, item number 1 is an ordinance rezoning property at 5604 State Avenue from CP1 Plant Limit Business District to BP Plant Business Park District, recommended for approval. Item 2 is an ordinance rezoning property at 3605 Bell Crossing from R1B Single Family District to AG Agricultural District, recommended for approval. Item 3, an ordinance rezoning property at 4251 North 60th Street from R1 Single Family District to AG Agricultural District, recommended for approval. Item 4 is an ordinance rezoning property at 4225 Mission Road, 3002 through 3004 West 43rd Avenue and 3014 West 43rd Avenue from R1B Single Family District to R2B Two Family District, recommended for approval. Item 5 is an ordinance rezoning property at 1847 South 14th Street from C1 Limited Business District to CP3 Planned Commercial District, recommended for approval. Item 6 is an ordinance vacating right-of-way between 5205 and 5159 Farrell, recommended for approval. Item 7 is the last item, is an ordinance vacating an alley at 401 and 40151 Fairbanks Avenue, recommended for approval. Those are all items on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Does any member of the commission, the county administrator, or anyone in attendance tonight wish to set aside any item on the planning and zoning consent agenda? If an item is not set aside, all items on the planning and zoning consent agenda will be voted on by one vote to follow the recommendation of the planning commission. If you'd like to come forward, please state your name and city of residency.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Leo Lyles. My property exists at 506 North 4th Street, Kansas City, Kansas. And I would like to ask that item B4 be pulled for further consideration.
Which number?
Item B4,
Which is 2019-106, I suppose? That's correct? Okay, thank you. Yes. Yes, sir. You can have a seat.
thank you.
Dana Bai, on behalf of Northridge at Piper Estates, we would request that item A3 be set aside.
Okay. Thank you. All right, seeing that is all, you have something you'd like to set aside?
I'm not quite sure if this is on the consent agenda, but the ordinance for 3605 Bell Crossing for it to be an agricultural area.
That is on consent agenda.
I'd like to have that set aside.
Okay, what was that again?
B2.
B2. You have that, Bridget? Thank you. All right. It's one of the portions of B2. D2. D2, thank you. All right.
Move to approve all remaining items.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. That takes us to set aside item 2019-106. Nope.
The first set aside, Mayor, is going to be A3, which is number 3209.
All right. Thank you. A3, number 3209. All right. Is the applicant Rob?
Thank you, Mayor. The proposal before you comes about, the original amenity in this development was to be a trail system, and our regulations require those trails to be paved trails, and they didn't want to do that. So they have proposed to have a picnic shelter, some picnic tables, and a barbecue, and then allow the neighbors within the 40 acres of open space to have more of a meandering ad hoc trail system that they could use at their pleasure, walk from their houses over to the point where the amenity would be. You see on your screen right here, there's a street stub right there which could accommodate 3 or 4 parking places. The first phase of this development has 11 or 12 houses in it, and the Planning Commission has recommended approval.
Okay.
I believe that Mr. Schlick is here to discuss the proposal as well.
All right. Mr. Schlicht?
Evening, Matt Slish, Engineering Solutions, 50 Southeast 30th Street, Lee Summit, Missouri. So yeah, as Rob said, this is a 23-lot, large lot subdivision. All the lots will be 5 acres. Then it has a large common space on the interior core area. And essentially about a year ago, we brought this project forward where we're going to use some trails, some other things kind of meandering through that common space. Through some discussion with staff, we feel like there's a different site amenity that we propose now that meets the criteria of what's required in the Piper Overlay District, which is a shelter, a couple picnic tables, a barbecue pit area. Then, as Rob said, all the residents will have the opportunity to kind of meander through the trails and use that same common area just for whatever they'd like. So the whole intent and idea is that someone could own 5 acres but still have use of, 40-plus acres for their rural site, so.
All right, thank you. At this time, I'd open up the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor, first of all, of number 3209? Seeing none, anyone not in favor?
That would be me. Dana Bai, on behalf of Northridge at Piper Estates Homes Association. We're not opposed to the development. We are opposed to the requirement of the developer to have to build the amenity in phase 1 and not have to build the infrastructure to allow for the off-street parking for the amenity. The option as it stands is to have him build the amenity when he is building the lots that will be along 115th and Hollingsworth Road, those 11 lots. And they're going to build the amenity, which happens to be at the intersection of our south entrance of our subdivision. It's a very narrow entrance. We have one way in and one way out with a monument island. And right now, they have been dumping like construction material or something. They've been driving back and forth. And we have a considerable amount of mud that's been drug out onto the street. So my concern, the last time I was here, was saying, if you're going to require him to build the amenity in phase 1, you should require him to build the infrastructure that could facilitate the parking for that amenity. Because I don't feel like our entrance is the proper place for this subdivision to utilize parking to access their amenity. And they said that they felt like there was adequate parking space up there. I have gotten with the fire marshal. It is my understanding that they would request that parking at least be restricted to at least one side of the street. I do have pictures of the mud as it stands right now that we have. So if they're not going to require that the cul-de-sac be built while the amenity is being built, if someone can address the erosion issues that we're having with the mud being drug out onto the street, either if they're going to allow them to put down gravel for these people to park, or at least do something to keep the mud from being drug out onto the street.
You have 1 minute.
I'm done.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in opposition? All right, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Would the petitioner like to make any closing comments? Or Rob, would you like to?
I don't know. Matt, do you need? So this is a little bit of a blow up of what the actual plat is. Here's their side amenity, the picnic shelter. Here's the street that comes in and turns to go into Northridge. And then I'll show you where see if I can zoom in on the stub here, and you can see that. Can't see that far anymore. So as you can see, here's the entrance to the subdivision. Here's the monument that's divided. There's this area right here where the street stubs out is adequate for probably 3, maybe 4 cars. And I haven't heard anything from the fire marshal, but we could certainly limit any other parking to one side of the street. I'll have contact Public Works tomorrow and have them look into the mud issue. I don't know why that exists there. Once they build the amenity back here and they're just walking across the grass, I don't think there should be any more mud issues. I'm not sure what's causing that or what the dumping is about, but we can take care of that administratively in the meantime. The Planning Commission has recommended approval as it's presented to you.
Do any members of the commission have any questions or comments? Commissioner Bynum?
I do. The development is to the west side of the screen, correct? The proposed new housing.
So there's 3 phases of this. The first phase will be 11 or 12 houses. Oh, wrong way. 11 or 12 houses along 115th Street. The second phase will be the homes along Hollingsworth And the third phase will be where they build the new little street stubs, here and up here, and put the lots adjacent to those. They're all 3-acre lots,
The first phase is along 115th,
correct?
and yet we're requiring this amenity be built in phase one?
We're requiring it to be built in phase one, but, so these are all 3-acre lots along here, and there's 40 acres of open space in here, and they'll have trails that come from the back of these houses over to the amenity.
So some of them could use the trails to go to the
Correct.
amenity,
They can
but
just walk through
some
the
are gonna
woods.
drive.
Right.
And the issue that's being brought up is, for those that drive, there's not adequate parking at the site of the
Right,
amenity.
correct, right here.
And so is there a temporary fix for that while
Well,
we?
so this is a public street, and these, there's a stub here. I'm sorry, this is not doing what I want it to very well. But this stub right here is about the depth of a parking space. And so I think that for 12 houses, 3 or 4 spaces is completely adequate for people. I mean, subdivision amenities don't get used that often by that many people. There's only 12 houses. And it seems like as an interim, we could make use of this. If you want to do it differently, that's up to you all, but
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any sort of in-between.
well, eventually, they're
Yes,
going to build a street in here with a cul-de-sac and have other lots that adjoin that as well. But that'll be in phase 3.
Right, and a timeline on phase 3, do we know?
You'd have to ask Mr. Schlitt.
Sir, do you have a timeline? So, I guess my question is, for how long do you think that you'd be building phase 1 along with the amenity that's required to go with it, and have that be all that exists of your development? What would that length of time look like to you?
It's tough to guess. I mean, with our hope of phase one, we'll have 11 lots online. And then phase 2, which will be up on the North and Hollingsworth side, will add another 6 lots. So if you assume an assumption of 4 or 5 lots maybe per year, you're talking 3 years before we get to building that cul-de-sac, be my guess. But
So it could be 3 years.
Right, but
in this condition.
Yeah, and like Rob said, our belief with that amenity would be is that it's a person that's going to take their backpack, hike with their kids kind of through the trails, stop at the park or the shelter, and then walk back home, just feeling like it would be unlikely that someone would leave their house on 115th Street, drive a half mile up to Hollingsworth and back and around to park their car to go do that. I think they'd pick some other place along the way. This, I think, truly would be used by more of a pedestrian way when, the whole idea of this group is that if you're going to own 5 acres and you have rights to 40 of it, so you just have, like, I have 4 boys, we would meander through that woods all day long, and I think that's what'll happen. I don't see that many people parking cars, would be our reasoning.
Okay, thanks. So I would just say, if we can address the current mud issue, as you suggest, with contacting Public Works tomorrow, and check on the issue that Ms. Spy brought up with the fire marshal.
We can do that.
I don't know how to include those kinds of items as stipulations in an approval.
I can work that administratively. I don't know that they need to be a stipulation. I can take care of those that's part of, we can put the no parking signs on the street. We can have the mud cleared from the street. We don't need a stipulation for that.
I'd move approval.
Commissioner Philbrook?
A chance to think about this for a minute, because the more questions Commissioner Bynum asked, the more things came to my mind about this. We're making a lot of assumptions here, and that is that only the people that live the new houses that are going to use that facility, that's open to anybody to get into. It's not like it's limited, right?
It's a private amenity to the folks in that subdivision. But you're right. I could drive over there and use it if I
really?
wanted to.
Right, exactly. Let's get real about this. So with that with the reality of it in mind, and them putting it way down there, and I can understand what they're thinking, but in this, there's no guarantees of when that phase 3 is actually going to happen. I mean, there's no certainty in this life. You don't know how fast you can sell the other lots and when Phase 3 is going to be here. It could be 3 years out, it could be 20 years out. So I think we need to look at this if it's going to be in Phase 1 to make it work for everybody, if we're going to enforce it being in Phase 1.
Okay, we do have a motion for approval, did not have a second, because it's a question.
And Mayor, I'm good with, continuing to seek a resolution, and I can pull my motion if that's required.
Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. Do we know where the mud is coming from specifically? Is it a recurring issue after a rain? Or can vehicles drive down over that cul-de-sac lip and drive down to the area? And we're witnessing some of that, and they're carrying the mud into the streets. Do we know?
You can see the tracks that go back, and it's used for like dumping of construction materials, or big trucks are going back there. I don't live on that street. I live towards the front. Commissioner Kane actually lives down from that street, and trucks are seen on a fairly regular basis over the course of time dumping stuff back there. So, it's not intentional, obviously, and it's his land, and if he's allowed to dump construction material on it, then that's his right. It's just that it's done enough that the mud is coming out. And so I didn't understand why we have complained about the mud before. I know that gravel is, frowned upon. I get that. But I have a problem with requiring him to build it in Phase 1 and not requiring the infrastructure at the same time. There are many other subdivisions in the Piper area that are well past their first phase that do not have amenities built. So, I'm not a fan of Mr. Higdon. That is not a secret. And I'm not here advocating for him to not have to do his job. But it seems crazy to me that all of a sudden we're going to say, in Phase 1, you're going to build this amenity. When Freeman Farms doesn't have a structural amenity, the colony at Piper Lake doesn't have an amenity, Connor Creek doesn't have an amenity. Those places don't have structural amenities at this time. They are past their first phase. So the fact that this is a 23-lot subdivision, which is a stretch in itself, it seems a lot to require the developer to do that in Phase 1. Like, let him wait till Phase 3. He's got, time to build those other houses, build up the HOA, then they can build their little picnic hut or whatever it is. And then at that time, they'll have time to have that cul-de-sac built, because that's when there's two residential lots, 5 acres, and then the common area is basically platted for in between there. And then 200 feet off of the cul-de-sac is where the cabana is slated to be. So I don't think there's a necessity for that to be built within Phase 1. And I think that would take away the issue if we didn't require it to be built within Phase 1.
Yes, Rob?
So those subdivisions you mentioned were done before the master plan that requires them to be built in Phase 1. We have innumerable complaints from those subdivision owners about the developers not building the amenities that they were promised. So that's why that's a Phase 1 requirement. So,
I
Thank you.
fully understand that.
Dana,
but-
it's not really, sorry. The question was, what is the dirt, the mud, and
Mayor, I might propose that we send Public Works out to determine where the mud may be coming from, to determine if it's going to be a continuing issue. What I find a little concerning is if there's going to continue to be mud and we're going to be sending crews out, that's a cost to the city that shouldn't be occurring and during the development. So I want to find a resolution. I just don't want to spend any more city resources fixing something that should be fixed or handled by the developer.
well, I don't think, Rob, you're not suggesting that Public
We
Works.
won't clean the street, we'll cite them and have them clean it
Right.
if they don't do it. In the new developments, there's mud, and when we, after rains, it happens, and the developers are generally pretty good about cleaning up the streets. Sometimes they have to be reminded, but we don't do that ourselves. And they'll have to stop the dumping, that's not legal.
Commissioner Philbrook?
Well, thank you for saying that. Now you've answered most of my questions, that you vowed that you would take care of the mud issue and the dumping issue and find out what the heck's going on back in there, because as we all know, just because they own the property doesn't mean they have the right to dump anything on it they want to. So that's a absolute no. And so we can get this done then without stopping progress? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so.
I just wanted to make sure I understood this, that we were going to have our issues taken care of without having to send it back. Is that correct? Is that what I'm
Correct.
hearing? Okay.
So, and entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve.
I'm sorry.
Well, unless you called it.
I did recall it, but now I have a question.
Then I'll second it. Whichever.
So
Commissioner.
before I do second the motion, I just have a question, Rob. In the other developments that were identified where their amenity hasn't been yet built, and those residents are upset, there's no hammer on our part that comes down. If that's the reason why you were requiring it now,
Correct. We don't have a methodology to require those to be built until they come back for another phase. When they come back for another phase, then we can require that, and we are as they come back. But
so in this case, we'd be coming back for a phase 2 and a phase 3.
Correct.
And if we move the stipulation for the amenity now to phase 2, we still have our requirement in
Correct.
hand for phase 2.
correct.
So I would be willing to approve it if we deal with the mud and the dumping issues and allow the movement of the amenity into phase 2, but no later.
But that would
That's-
require a separate motion, correct?
That's the,
we would-
Yeah, there's a motion, you have a motion, there's no second on that motion.
Right. So we have a motion to approve as submitted. Is there a second? Okay. Hearing none. Now we go with,
You've got somebody blinking, I don't know.
yeah. Commissioner Burrows?
Thank you, Mayor. Rob, the pictures that we've shown is 2 wooden picnic tables and a fire pit, along with a 10 by 12 concrete pad with a, I guess, nothing short of a cabana-type roof on top of it,
Correct.
with no concrete sidewalk, or it's just mulch around the pad is what I'm to understand.
Correct.
So those the wooden tables, do we know if they're, the pictures are pretty plain Jane. I could buy one at one of the local hardware stores and put it together, and it looks like the fire pit. It doesn't give a dimension on the fire pit. It just looks like a barbecue. They call it a barbecue pit because it has a rack on the top of it.
Right.
So that's really not what I would consider an amenity. I mean, I would be a little concerned that that would be considered an amenity for
Well,
development.
We have, in the master plan, we have 3 different levels of amenity requirements, and when the subdivision is under 50 houses or under a certain acreage, then they're allowed to have a more minor amenity, because generally in the smaller subdivisions, you can't afford a pool, so there's other things you can't do. So at the time the master plan was developed, that was what was designated as an acceptable amenity for a small subdivision.
And that was acceptable to the homeowners that were building out there.
If they buy the houses on the lots, it will be.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
I entertain a motion.
Mayor, I would move approval with the stipulation that the amenity described be eliminated from this approval and included in phase 2 of any future development, as well as dealing with the dumping and mud issues.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows. Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Which one are we on? All right. That brings us to set aside item 2019-106. Thank you. State your name and city of residency.
Good evening, Mayor. My name is Megan Duma. I reside in Prairie Village, Kansas. I operate a number of Airbnbs or short-term rentals in the Kansas City area, and I bought this house at 408 Sandusky and believed that I only needed a rental permit when I first bought it, and then found out later that I needed a full special use permit, which is unique to Kansas City, Kansas. It's not the case in Kansas City, Missouri, or Johnson County. So I apologize for my discretion in renting it out when it didn't have the proper special use permit that was necessary. But I was contacted by staff and ceased leasing it out and put those stipulations on the website and everything. And I haven't taken reservations since then. The only person complaining about my Airbnb is a neighbor that doesn't live on the same street, and he lives at the rear portion of the property. When I first moved into the house has very little storage. It's only 900 square feet. So I put a 12 by 8 shed on the property. He was complaining that it was blocking a window of his that was about this big. I have photos of it, and he sent me an email with his rifle underneath of it saying that I was blocking his only west-facing window. This is a window that he keeps a stained glass piece in, so he was really not getting any view blocked whatsoever. And the only reason I bring up this tidbitty stuff is because we worked together. He cut down a tree. I moved the shed at my own expense, so his window wouldn't be blocked anymore, and I paid for the tree to be disposed of. And it wasn't until this special use permit and the Airbnb thing came up that he said, well, now I don't want your shed, and I'm complaining about everything. So I operate a good Airbnb. I am fully insured. I have a 24-hour-a-day property management service. I don't think there's any reason it should be disapproved. I'm just waiting to hear what the only complainant says about it.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone present who would like to speak in favor? You here to speak in favor?
Yes.
Now state your name and city of residency, please.
Yes, my name is Janice Witt. I reside in Kansas City, Kansas, and I welcome you. I certainly do. I hope you stay. And I ask that our commissioners would allow her to bring her Airbnb into the special use permit, because we have a lot of things happening in our community that very negatively affect the fact that people may or may not want to come here. I think that we should work to bring individuals into this community if they're willing to come. Having said that,
Ms. Witt, what does this have to do with the Airbnb permit?
since this is a public hearing, I should have. the
No,
opportunity to speak
you are
on
here
it.
to speak in favor of this permit.
And I did speak in favor of that permit.
Again, Mrs. Witt, you are out of line.
Okay. Is there an ordinance? Does someone have the ordinance that says that I specifically have to speak on a specific issue?
That's what was asked for. So if you want to make a political statement, you can make a political
It is
statement.
not a political
someplace-
statement.
Yes, it is.
See, there we go. Is there an ordinance that forbids me to speak on any issues? Is there an ordinance that takes my right to speak?
Mr. Moore, we'll get an opinion on that.
Okay, thank you. I have the right to know.
Ms. Witt, there are rules of procedure that the commission has adopted that govern their meetings and their proceedings.
1 minute remains.
And that rule specifically says that you can have a public hearing at a standing committee for any item that you'd like. However, when we're in a commission meeting, the public comment is limited solely to the matter before the commission. In this case, the issue is only of this special use permit. You've asked to speak in favor of that, so your comments have to be limited to speaking in favor of that application, nothing else.
Thank you for clarifying that. Can you please tell me that ordinance?
It's in the rules of procedure. I can give that to you. I think it's Rule 5.04.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this application?
Thank you. My opposition to granting this variance is, well, there's several, but one of them is pretty simple.
Did you state your name?
I'm sorry, my name is Leo Wilds. I live at 506 North 4th Street.
Thank you.
The most striking feature of this is that when this matter was first undertaken, certain caveats were placed on the property owner to be remedied before she could legally rent the premises again. And among those, two of them were repositioning the shed, which is kind of a big nuisance for me, but as I understand, she might be able to make code with that. Also a gravel driveway that she placed there. And none of those items have been addressed so far. But perhaps the most egregious of these is that Ms. Duma was operating the property as a bed and breakfast, an Airbnb, possibly as long ago as midsummer. And we do know there was a rather large 4th of July party there that was caused me to send my guests home that night because of the debris that was falling. But she has stated that she is no longer renting the property, but I was able to go online today and make a reservation for this weekend. So the property is still being listed for rent, and availabilities are clear. And it lists, I had asked for 3 nights for 4 persons, and I got a quote, $628.65. So obviously, the property is still for rent. Now, that anecdotally, my neighbors will tell you, they see people going, and I can't miss it when they come and go because they're 15 feet from my
You
building.
have 1 minute, sir.
That's really about the gist of it. I'm not opposed to the Airbnb, as a matter of fact, but I just feel that Ms. Duma should be restricted to the same set of standards that everybody else in the neighborhood is, and that's my opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a second, I have to, if there's no one else who would like to speak in opposition. All right, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask the petitioner if she'd like to make any closing comments.
I would. The 4th of July, that is not available for rent right now. I've clearly stated on Airbnb that we're not accepting reservations. I think that he's probably referring to HomeAway or VRBO, but I have it set up so I have to approve those bookings, and I do not approve those bookings. He did not actually try to book it. I have not taken any bookings, so that's just not true. The 4th of July party, I let my property manager, who works for me 24/7, have a barbecue at the place. And I didn't charge him, and it was just because I like him and we're friends. So that I'm not throwing parties there or anything like that. I'm a good Airbnb operator. I've never had any complaints against me other than Mr. Eltz. I'd happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
Okay, thank you. Do any members of the commission have any questions or comments? Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Iltz, it's good to see you again. I wish we were seeing each other under different circumstances. There's certainly, and you can just have a seat, because I just have, this is something that I have thought and read and talked a lot about, this whole issue. And so I want to share some thoughts, and then I will have my suggestion for action on this item. There are strong voices and valid arguments on both sides of this issue in every community in which it's raised. And it does seem that every community in the United States is currently dealing with the issue of short-term rentals. Some communities have embraced short-term rentals, and they encourage the thoughtful addition of short-term rental properties into their neighborhoods. But other communities are doing it differently. Carmel, California is considering banning short-term rentals in its downtown area, which is an interesting approach. Oakwood, Ohio recently banned short-term rentals citywide, which prompted the former mayor of Dayton, Gary Lietzel, to say, among other things, your new ordinance will not solve your problems, and it has already created a new one. And so this case is really a lot like those in that there is no one decision that will satisfy everyone involved in this. Many of the issues that I hear about this, I think, are issues that could exist with short-term rental, they could exist with long-term rental, they could exist with owner-occupied homes. And really, I can boil it down to 2 principles that we all need to follow in our neighborhoods. Be a good neighbor and follow all the applicable codes and ordinances. If we all do that, regardless of short-term, long-term, owner-occupied, we're going to really eliminate 99% of the issues that we have with our neighbors. So to Ms. Duma and to all the other hosts, I'm going to ask you, be a good neighbor. To all your guests in the future, I'm going to ask, be a good neighbor. To Mr. Iltz, I'm going to request that if they are not good neighbors, you notify us immediately, because this is a special use permit that has a time stamp on it, and it can be revoked for cause. please don't let any of your guests give us cause to revoke it in the future. I will be honest with you, I get annoyed when I see Airbnbs pop up for rent with no special use permit in hand from the owner. And I will agree, we, the unified government, we need to do a better job of letting folks like you know that there is an expectation that when you get that rental license, you also get the special use permit for this special rental application. But I'm going to encourage you and all the other hosts, you're entering into complex agreements with VRBO and Airbnb and everybody else. You know there are rules. Go to the city and ask, what is the entirety of the rule set that I need to follow to make this legal and above board in your city? And we'll be glad to share that with you. You know, there's a lot of pros to Airbnbs. I wrote down here, many of the buildings that are Airbnbs would otherwise be vacant and probably be blighted. So there is a lot of investment in our neighborhoods that takes place. Airbnbs do bring in sales tax and transient guest tax, which we can use for city services and for tourism promotion, which could potentially bring in other people. Potentially, Airbnbs generate a lot of traffic for small restaurants and small businesses that wouldn't otherwise see people who stay in larger hotels. And Airbnbs can be a source of economical lodging for travelers. Certainly I myself have used Airbnbs across the country and abroad. But there's problems with Airbnbs when guests don't follow house rules and create a nuisance for surrounding neighbors. There's also sometimes a problem when there's multiple renters that bring multiple cars into a neighborhood, especially our more compact neighborhoods like Strawberry Hill, and they create parking issues for the people who already live there. Now, that could also be an issue with a long-term rental, but it can be exacerbated if there are multiple short terms that have multiple guests with multiple cars. And one of the other things that's a little bit more of a philosophical issue is that a lot of Airbnbs in a community does reduce or take off the market potentially affordable dwellings that could be used by long-term renters, that could be used by people who are going to be in that community for a while, but they can't afford to pay that Airbnb nightly rate as a long-term rent. So some people do have concerns about reducing the availability of affordable housing in some of our neighborhoods. I think there's a lot of questions that we need to consider, and I'm going to invite both of you right now. Is it January 19th, Rob? January 19th, 2020, I do believe, will be some public input about our new zoning code rewrite.
It will be the week of January 29th. The 29th is tentative at the
That's
moment.
why I asked him, because I can't remember. Well, we are finishing up a rewrite of our zoning code, which attempts to address proactively on the front end some of these issues that we're facing. And some of the questions that I've had brought up is, should there be a distinction between properties where the owner lives on site versus where the owner doesn't live on site? Should that be codified somehow? I don't know, but it's been brought up. Is there some sort of maximum density that we should strive to stay below in a given neighborhood? Is there a certain number of houses or a certain percentage of available houses above which we get a diminishing return on our investment? I don't know, but I think it's a great thing to be considered for our new ordinance. And an interesting thing that I just read about in Michigan was that the Michigan Realtors Association has suggested that completely banning short-term rentals infringes on the owner's property rights, which is a very interesting argument that I think we need to think about as well. So with all of that as background, I'm going to make a motion to approve the special use permit contingent on the property owner successfully remediating any and all code violations that have been identified by UG staff. And I further move that the property owner continue not to host guests until such time as the special use permit has been officially granted.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows. Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. That takes us to set aside item D2. It's ordinance number, it's number, referenced as number 3198. Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The original zoning case was heard in September and approved with stipulations. This one is a little different than most because to fully resolve all their stipulations, the zoning has to be published because they're going to build new shelters for the animals, and so they can't get that building permit until we publish the ordinance. We may still be working some code issues on the case, but to fully resolve all those, they need the ordinance to be approved. And then we still have the active code cases that code enforcement is holding on until we resolve the issue. This is amongst the first few of the Soder Drive cases to move forward. So that's where this case sits. It was approved before this is the final action to publish the ordinance.
Okay. Is there anyone present who would like to speak in support of D2? Seeing none, I'd ask the person in opposition, please step forward, state your name and city of residence.
Tessier Mang, Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Old Quindaro Museum and some of the residents who live in that area. And that street is directly going to the Old Quindaro Museum, and it looks horrible. It never looked like that before there. They have trash and all kind of tore up furniture and stuff through there on the way to the Old Quindaro Museum. It did not look like that before then, and we don't appreciate it that it looks like that now. And considering how they're taking care of it now with the old animal crap and little crates and stuff sitting out there, some blocking the road, sometimes going up to the Quindaro Museum, I'm not in favor of that at all, considering that we're turning that site into a historical site. It could very well include that road that goes to the Old Quindaro Museum as well. I mean, not museum, but the cemetery.
Thank you. Rob, this is actually part of the effort to bring that area, that street, that drive, everything.
Correct. There's lots of
Compliance.
problems along Bell Crossing, Soder Drive with code enforcement issues. There's something like 50 open cases there, and this is one of the first steps we're taking to allow people to come into compliance so they can build the shelters that they really need, get rid of the temporary stuff, and resolve their code cases. So this should make it get better for this particular
improve.
property. There's still other, because that way we can actually move the code case forward. Once they have this, right now, our direction from the commission was to put people in a position where they could resolve their code cases through zoning if possible. So this is one of the cases where we could do that because they had 5 acres. Changing it to agriculture would allow them to have the animals and have multiple accessory structures. And so that's what they need to be able to clean this site up. And then if they don't follow through with the rest of the code enforcement cases, they'll be in the administrative citation process and fined regularly for not complying. So I think this is, the owner has been in good faith going through the process, spent the money to file for the zoning change, and I think they want to do the right thing. But in some ways, without the zoning change, they were prevented from doing the right thing.
So it actually will continue on to look the way it does, or just simply won't get any better without this ordinance change.
Correct.
Okay.
What does that have to do with the upkeep? I mean, I'm gonna send all of y'all pictures tomorrow. They don't even clean up the trash over there.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry you're out of process, but I'll ask you to come up. So if you come up. So I will say that over the past year and a half, I have received numerous complaints from folks who live in that neighborhood citing the very same things you're saying. And so we have really put a full court press on that area, sending police, codes enforcement, and others to monitor the area, to write up the complaints, to see what needs to be done. And so one of the individuals there, in order to allow them to do the improvements they need to make it look better, we need this ordinance change. That's what this ordinance, this zoning change is about. It's not to allow them to continue to do this. It's really one of the first steps we have to do to make it better.
My question was, what does that have to do with the trash and debris? That has nothing to do with the animals or anything.
So, and I could say that on those issues, those folks have been cited. We've had meetings with them. They know what they're facing. It's going to be increasingly getting better.
And I would say that we put those code cases on hold until some of these cases got resolved. And we will have a meeting, I believe that's set for the first or second week of January with code enforcement to go through those and say, these are resolved, take care of the rest of the code enforcement issues on those, or these, we're still working with them, enforce this part of it, but hold off on this part. So we're looking at all those cases individually, and we can contact the code officer tomorrow and say that their zoning's approved, so they need to progress rapidly, and he can, and one of the two departments will get the communication to the
I will email
owner.
you guys
Thank you.
a picture tomorrow of the area he's
Please,
speaking of.
I have received lots of those pictures, so thank you. Commissioner Bynum?
So just to reiterate, Mayor's office is well aware of the condition of this area. Commissioner Townsend is well aware. I'm well aware. Commissioner Philbrook and I have driven this. We've been working on it for more than a year. We're aware of the codes issues. It becomes very complex because some of the people who own property in this area as well as live here have been there for generations. Others have not and are newer property owners in this area. But whether they're generations deep in this area or they're more recent, when we called them all to a meeting to explain to them the legalities of the issues they were facing and lay out for them the legal remedies and solutions, most of them, I would say, were completely unaware, either whether they'd been there for generations or whether they had just recently purchased. They were unaware of the particular types of zoning they needed in order to do what they were doing at their property. Again, some of them who had been there for generations. And so we laid out it had to be a one-on-one situation with each of them individually based on what their current zoning situation was, what the current activity of their property was, and work with them on a one-on-one basis to begin helping them rectify the legal issues that they and we were all dealing with. And it all started because of exactly what you are describing. So it all started as neighbors coming to us saying, please help us. And so that is what we're trying to do. If I could reiterate it any other way, I would. The goal is that we're all now trying to work with them to move forward toward a cleaner environment and a safer environment, because we've got, it's a beautiful place. And like I said, many of them have been there for a very long time. Unfortunately, when this part of the area became part of Kansas City, Kansas, if I'm generations deep on my parcel of property, I don't know what that means for me in terms of what the rules are now. And that's part of what we're dealing with. And so, yes, I would go so far as to say it's downright frightening to drive in this area. And, but we're working on fixing that, so.
Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you. Ms. Meek, let me assure you that I'm not going to repeat what Commissioner Bynum's already said. You've heard it. This, as Mr. Richardson has said, is part of a corrective action taken for residents who were there, been there for decades, but our zoning and what was happening there were not consistent. It is no excuse for trash. We have to be careful about who we accuse of how trash got there. I picked up a bunch of trash that I didn't put in my own yard. So we have to be careful with that. Let me also assure you that there may be subsequent applications that deal with similar issues in here that may be closer to the Quindaro Cemetery and all of that. And we'll be looking at that very closely. In terms of what accessories can go there or not, as we look at the pathway that leads to historic areas like that. So, thank you. Thank you for your concern.
All right, thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows. Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. That concludes the planning and zoning portion of tonight's meeting. We'll now move to the regular portion of our agenda. This is the regular consent agenda. Does any member of the commission or county administrator wish to set aside any item on the regular consent agenda? If an item is not set aside, all items on the regular consent agenda will be voted on by one vote.
Move to approve all items as submitted.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. That takes us to the administrator's agenda. This is, item number 1 is the state and federal legislative programs. I'll turn it over to Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of weeks ago, we met with the state delegation regarding our state and federal legislative proposed program that we have. During the course of that conversation, Mr. Taylor presented all the different, or the main items that were a part of this. Tonight, I would ask Mr. Taylor to come forward and just make note of items that where we made changes based on some of the comments that came back from the commission. I don't think it's necessary for us to go through the whole presentation again unless commissioners would like that. We'll just talk about anything that may have changed since the last time we presented it. Mike?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Commission. There were a couple of suggestions made when we presented the full agenda in that special session. I have made those changes. One of them was Commissioner Kane had raised the issue about adding an item about reduction of the state food sales tax. That's been added. And Mayor Alvey raised an issue about the way some language was worded on the final page regarding environmental and energy mandates. That language was changed to meet that. And I think those were the two major changes that were made that were brought up during that session beyond what was already in the program. So those tweaks have been made and changed.
Thank you. Any comments from the commission? Commissioner Walters?
Yes. Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to bring to your attention and to the rest of the commission that I did make some comments at that meeting, and I made the same comments the year before, and that is taking exception to our recommendation that we support an overpass over Village West Parkway at State Avenue, which is listed as a $11 million project. I have opposed this project since I first heard of it. I think we need to do everything we can to keep the Legends retail area an inviting and positive experience for our residents, and adding a complicated grade-separated intersection at Village West Parkway and State Avenue contradicts that approach. The last design I saw widened Village West Parkway to 9 lanes at State Avenue. And I think for the 360 days a year that a race is not happening, I think the current at-grade intersection can function properly. So I just wanted to tell you why I would not be supporting this. I don't think I can support the entire recommendation except one item, so that's why I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Can you make a motion to remove? Commissioner, you could make a motion to remove that, and if there was a majority vote to remove that item, that would be removed, and we could vote for the rest.
Well, in that case.
I believe that's correct.
I would like to
Well,
make a
that's
motion
a different,
that we
that was on a
remove,
different matter, not on legislative agenda.
excuse me,
I'm sorry. it was-
my, Adeline,
Mr. Moore, is this correct?
That's correct. The legislative package is up for adoption. You can remove any portion or whatever, and then the commission can vote to approve the remaining agenda.
okay, well, just, great, then I will do that. This particular item is kind of linked with improving I-435 at State and also improving State Avenue and Meadow Lake Parkway, Legends Parkway. So I'm only concerned about the Legends Village West Parkway portion of that. So I would like to suggest that we eliminate the reference to the Village West Parkway and State interchange as currently described.
Second.
And to approve the remainder as proposed.
To approve everything else. Thank you.
Okay, and this is just the federal legislative agenda.
Yes, Mayor and Commissioner Walters, that is in the federal agenda, and that's because it's requesting federal funding for that project. So we can easily take that part out.
We have two motions. One will be for the state, one will be for the federal. So we'll handle the federal first.
Depending on the motion, as it can be, and to approve the state agenda as it's presented.
Okay.
Yes, the only issue that I have is with
Right.
that particular item. So I would move to approve all the remaining items of the
State and
of state, federal.
okay, we have a motion
Second.
and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. Our final item is the issuance of industrial revenue bonds for PQ Corporation. Mr. Bach?
Thank you, Mayor. This item came before you a couple of weeks ago when we had a full public hearing regarding the PQ Corporation and their intent to expand their plant. We brought forward full presentation at that time. Typically in these, that was our intent. We did the resolution of intent was approved at then. They are ready to move forward. That's where you see this item tonight, where they wanted to go ahead and move on with the issuance of a couple of the first phases with this. We can certainly present the item again. However, as we did just present it on 2 consecutive meetings before this, I would recommend approval as submitted.
Move to approve Series 2019A as submitted.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
Move to approve Series 2019B as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting for the evening. We are adjourned.